Think of someone you know who is proud. Really take a second. Maybe it's someone at work who can never be wrong. Maybe it's someone at church who makes you know about their good deeds before you even ask. Maybe it's a family member who turns every conversation back to themselves. You already have a face in your mind. Now here's the question I actually want you to sit with. Why was it so easy to think of them? Not what you think you should say, not the Sunday school answer. What's the real reason that name came so quickly? Because here's the thing about pride. It is the one sin that makes you completely invisible to yourself. You can spot it in a room full of people and never once suspect it lives in you. And that invisibility is exactly what makes it the most dangerous thing in the room. This week's lesson is called Pride versus Humility, and it is not a lesson about other people. It never was. Memory text. The memory text is Luke 14:11. Jesus says it plainly, "For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." Now, most of us have heard that verse so many times it has lost its teeth. We nod at it. We put it on a coffee mug, and then we keep doing exactly what we were doing. But don't rush past it, because Jesus isn't giving a motivational tip here. He is describing a law, the same way gravity is a law, not a suggestion, not advice for particularly arrogant people, a description of how the universe actually works. Exalt yourself, you will be brought down. Humble yourself, you will be lifted. Not maybe, not sometimes, not when you deserve it, will be. The question this lesson is asking is not whether you believe that verse. The question is whether your life looks like you believe it, because those are two very different things.
Let's start at the beginning, because pride didn't start with you or me. It didn't start in a boardroom or a middle school hallway. It started somewhere far older and far higher. The first proud being in the universe was Lucifer, the covering cherub, closest to the throne, most glorious of the created order, and somehow in a place of perfect beauty, with no wound, no trauma, no reason, a thought crept in. I deserve more. I should be this. I could be higher. 1 John 2:15 through 17 tells us the anatomy of what happened next. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. Three tributaries feeding the same river, and that river has been running through human history ever since. Here's what's worth understanding. Pride is not the same as confidence. It is not the same as acknowledging a gift God gave you. It is not pride to know you are loved by God, that your life has value, that you have something to offer. Pride is something very specific. Pride is taking the credit for yourself that belongs to God. Pride is the moment you look at what God built through you and quietly think, "That was me." You know the difference between a glass holding water and a glass that thinks it made the water. Same glass, completely different relationship with what it's carrying. The glass doesn't make the water, it holds it. That's what pride forgets. We are the vessel, not the source. And that one forgotten truth, that everything we are and have comes from Him, is the root of every version of pride that has ever ruined a relationship, a ministry, or a life.
Monday, know yourself. Jesus told a story. Two men, a temple, a prayer. The first man is the one everyone sees at the front on Sabbath morning, respected, known, and he prays out loud, thanking God that he is not like other people, not the people who cheat, not the people who fail, not that man in the back. He is a good man, and he wants God to know he knows it. The second man stands at the very back. He doesn't raise his eyes. He beats his chest. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. That's it. That's his whole prayer. And Jesus says it was the second man who went home justified, not the first. Luke 18:14. Not the one with the resume, the one with the need. This upside-down kingdom Jesus keeps describing doesn't fit the way we were wired. Every system in the world rewards the person at the front. Every algorithm promotes the person performing. And Jesus keeps pointing to the person at the back and saying, that one, that's the one I can work with. Because here's the thing that Ellen White puts so plainly, it is almost uncomfortable. It is only he who knows himself to be a sinner that Christ can save. Not a pretty sinner, not a reformed sinner, a sinner, present tense. Someone who has stopped measuring themselves against the people around them and started measuring themselves against Jesus. And when you do that, really do it, there is only one possible result. You fall to your knees. not in despair, in clarity. Because the distance between who you are and who He is not a condemnation, it's an invitation. 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Not almost faith, not generally just. The humility that brings you to your knees is the same movement that brings grace rushing in. You cannot have one without the other.
Tuesday, Moses. Now I want to take you somewhere that surprised me this week. Moses, one of the greatest men in the Bible, educated in all the wisdom of Egypt, military leader, philosopher, statesman. He was, by every human standard, the most powerful man in the most powerful nation on earth, and the world was his, completely, utterly his. But Hebrews 11:24-26 tells us what he chose instead. He refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to suffer with the people of God rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. He considered the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. Greater riches. He did the math on purpose. And here's what I want you to sit with. This was not a man born into poverty who found God and decided to make the best of it. This was a man who had everything and gave it up, not because he had to, because he saw further than the people around him. Then, in his pride, he killed a man, lost everything, spent 40 years in the desert, and God used those 40 years to do the one thing Egypt never could. He broke Moses' self-sufficiency, the very thing that made Moses the most dangerous man in the room. His power, his ability, his confidence in his own strength. God had to dismantle it before he could use it. And after 40 years, Numbers 12:3 says something almost unbelievable. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth. More than all men on the face of the earth. The most powerful leader Israel ever had, and the most humble person alive. Those two things are not in contradiction. They are the same person, because real power, the kind God entrusts to someone, only flows safely through a humble vessel. Think about what would have happened if Moses had faced the burning bush with his Egypt ego still intact. God couldn't have used a man who thought he didn't need God. He needed the shepherd, unsure, quiet, no longer certain of his own greatness. That man God could fill. All right. Let's take a breath for a second. We've covered a lot of ground. We've seen where pride was born in Lucifer. Before this world existed, we've seen the Pharisee who prayed at the front and went home empty. And we've seen Moses, the most powerful man of his era, humbled in a desert and made into something eternal. If any of that is landing, we're not done yet. The second half of this lesson goes somewhere that I think is the most important part. And before we keep going, a quick word. These videos exist because people like you watch them, share them, and make it possible for us to keep going. If this channel has been part of your walk with God, consider becoming a member. Your support is what keeps this content free and available to anyone who needs it anywhere in the world. We genuinely don't take that lightly, and thank you to the members who are already with us. You are part of every single video we put out. All right. Let's keep going.
Wednesday, the greatest offense. Here's the moment I want you to really sit with. The disciples had been with Jesus for 3 years. 3 years of watching him heal the blind, raise the dead, feed thousands with almost nothing. 3 years of learning from the most extraordinary teacher who ever lived. And in Luke 22, on the night he would be arrested, the last meal, the last few hours, they started arguing about which one of them was the greatest. Read that again slowly. The night Jesus was heading toward the cross, and the men closest to him were arguing about who was more important. That is not ancient history. That is a mirror. Because here is what Ellen White says about pride, and it is possibly the most serious thing in this whole lesson. There is nothing so offensive to God or so dangerous to the human soul as pride and self-sufficiency. Of all sins, it is the most hopeless, the most incurable, the most hopeless, the most incurable. Not because God can't heal it, but because pride is the one sin that tells you that you don't need healing. Every other sin tends to eventually bring you to your knees. The addict hits bottom. The liar gets caught. The angry person destroys something they love and finally sees it. But the proud person, especially the religious proud person, has built a theology that explains why everything they are doing is right, and that is a dangerous place to live. The disciples were arguing about greatness at the foot of the cross, and they had no idea. And neither do we, most of the time. Thursday, look at him. And then Jesus speaks. Luke 22:27. Yet I am among you as the one who serves, not as the one who is served, not as the greatest, the one who serves. God in human form at a table, washing feet. And then Philippians 3:3-8 takes it even further. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. And then it traces the arc. Jesus, who was in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be held on to. He emptied himself, took the form of a servant. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Here's the detail I want you to not walk past. He was in the form of God. He had more right to pride than anyone who has ever existed or ever will. There was nothing false about his greatness. It was real, it was total, and he let go of it. Not because he had to, because love required. The most powerful being in the universe chose to be the least powerful person in the room, and he did it not once, not dramatically, not in a single moment of surrender. He did it every day, every conversation, every meal. He consistently put himself last for 3.5 years in every ordinary encounter. That is not a theological concept. That is a character, a way of living. And Hebrews 1:3 says Jesus is the exact image, the precise engraving of the Father, which means every time Jesus knelt to wash a disciple's feet, that was God kneeling. That is what God looks like when he has a face. That is the character we are studying, not a distant judge waiting for you to get humble enough. A God who modeled it himself every day in front of witnesses until the day he died. And when we look at that, really look at it, pride has nowhere to stand. Not because we shame ourselves into humility, because you cannot genuinely see Jesus and still think yourself important by comparison. The closer you get, the more you realize there is no comparison. And that realization is not crushing. It is the most freeing thing in the world.
Let me bring the week together. Sunday showed us that pride began before this world, in a being who had everything and still wanted more. And it traced the same virus into Adam, into Eve, and into every one of us. Monday gave us the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, and showed us that the prayer God honors is the one that doesn't try to impress, just need, just honesty, just be merciful to me. Tuesday took us to Moses, the most powerful man in the world, who spent 40 years being emptied of himself so that God could fill him with something Egypt never could have given him. Wednesday showed us the disciples arguing about greatness on the night their teacher was walking toward the cross, and it told us that pride is the most dangerous sin precisely because it tells you you don't have a problem. Thursday brought us to Jesus, the only one who ever had the right to be proud, who chose to be a servant and called us to be the same. And here is what I want you to carry out of this week. Stop asking, am I humble? That question is almost impossible to answer from the inside. Pride is designed to blind you to itself. Instead, ask this: when was the last time I was genuinely more concerned with someone else's glory than my own? When did I last let someone else get the credit without even a twinge of wanting it back? When did I last fail publicly and resist the urge to explain? Those are not rhetorical questions. They are diagnostics, and if you sit with them quietly, you will know exactly where you are.
Here's something practical for this week. Once a day, Before you do anything else, read Luke 22:27 one time, not a chapter, one verse. Yet I am among you as the one who serves. And ask yourself, how can I be that today, in this house, at this table, in this conversation? Because humility is not a feeling you cultivate. It is a decision you make. In ordinary moments, repeat it every day. Luke 14:11, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. The difference between the Pharisee and the tax collector was not goodness. Both walked into the same temple. The difference was where they were looking. One was looking at himself, the other was looking at God, and the one who was looking at God couldn't find room for pride. There wasn't space for it. There never is. If this gave you something, share it with someone who has been quietly nursing a wound. They don't know his pride. Someone who is in conflict, can't understand why relationships keep breaking, keeps getting passed over, and can't figure out why. Sometimes what looks like hurt is actually pride in disguise. Show them this. It might change the question they've been asking. We'll see you next week. Grace be with you.